Hi everyone. I want to show you how to make the deepest, most responsive program on the dais that will find everything that the general default programs, meaning all of them, can't find. And you can apply this actually to any metal detector, but I want you to sort of understand what happens when you start using features of a metal detector compared to your signal. Excuse my hand, I had hand surgery the other day, so I'm still healing. But this is your coil and you're swinging it back and forth. Let's say that's your target right there. You're swinging it back and forth. When you go over this target, it needs to beep. It's not helpful to you if you swing over this target and it beeps and your coil beeps over here. So when you go over a target, it has to process that signal of this item right then and there. And if we look at this line here, this is the amount of time. This is going to represent the amount of time that the detector has to process when you're over that. So it goes over that and it goes, there's something there. I have to figure out what it is. And that's all the amount of time it has. Because if it took longer than this time, then you'd be over here by the time it finally said, hey, there's something. And then you could never figure out where it was. Now, all of the newer metal detectors are CPU based. And this line is going to represent the CPU. This CPU only has so much capacity. And these are actually called, the programming world, CPUs on programs, which is what this is running, they have ticks. So there's ticks going all the way across. So this this CPU has this much power for that much time, okay? And I'm gonna actually tick this all out here. Now what happens is if you go into the dais and you start turning on stuff like iron volume, well, when you get a signal, your CPU has to spend a few of its ticks processing that. And if you go into other things, let's see what else is next. Reactivity. What reactivity does is it physically shortens this. So now you only have this much space to process that signal. Audio response, again, audio response, it has to take time to figure it out and beep it to you. And if we go into expert, we have tones. Each of these tones, when the signal comes in, the CPU has to say, okay, I need, what tones did they select? They selected 3, let me figure out what the configuration is. Okay, I have to divide it 3 ways. What do they have it set to, etc. And that all takes these ticks right here. Bottle caps at 5, again, that's another filter that it has to take that signal and go, okay, I need 4 ticks to process this bottle cap filter. Now what that does is, as you consume these ticks, it has to, this gets shorter right here, this amount of time that it can process. And so if you imagine this line, or even this line, and this is your depth right here, the less ticks you have available to process the signal, there's your depth. That time, this bar is getting compressed because, okay, this many ticks were consumed, or we'll go this way, this many ticks were consumed, so your length of CPU available now is only this big, which there's your depth that gets shorter. So you want the longest amount of CPU time to be able to get the greatest depth and the more processing power, because when you hit a target, it has to figure out if it's iron or not. And that's why when you do a slow or a faster recovery speed, you shorten this line, the amount of time that it's allowed to detect. So you artificially shorten your CPU power by selecting a shorter recovery time called reactivity in the Deus world. And so that's why when you have this shorter CPU time, that you get the less of the depth. And the same goes with discrimination. If you have a bunch of things discriminated, you know, the Deus, it may do one or a couple notches that you can do. It has to, it will detect this signal, and it has to apply that to a filter that says throw away these VDIs. And that's why manufacturers always say if you use discrimination, you reduce your depth, because you're consuming these ticks. So the best program on the Deus, what is it? Well, we know that park mode is between 4 and I believe 24 kilohertz. So to find 1900 silver coins, the best is around 4 kilohertz. To find 1800 thin coins and small coins, the best is around 20. So Park is very good in that it has the 4 to 24 or so range. So you want to start in the Park program, and what you want to do is you can leave this, I leave discrimination on 7. If you really want to go ultimately deep, you're going to set this to a 0, or as low as it will go. Okay. Sensitivity, you want to run that at 99 because you want it to be ultra sensitive. Iron volume, that's another filter. You want to get it off. Reactivity, remember, you want your line, you want your CPU line as long as possible. You want as long as possible so you have all these ticks to be able to process the signal and tell you what it is and for it to decide if it's good or not. Audio response, you know, audio response and the idea of deeper targets being more quiet, is stupid. You know, that is from 30 years ago where people thought, I mean, when would you never want to hear a target? Why would you want to make it harder to hear a target, you know? So I keep mine at about 5, but again, that's another filter that you can get rid of, but I feel that that's much needed. That's much needed. Okay, if we go into expert, bottle caps, you want to reduce bottle caps all the way down to 0. Notch, you got to get rid of that notch. That's a filter. That really consumes CPU power. Silencer, again, another filter, another filter. If you want to go deep, you're going to have to accept the fact that it's going to be a little bit noisy. So 0 there. Now we don't use that filter and we get more CPU ticks. Tones. Again, these tones, it takes CPU power to figure out what slots they go into. So the best tone to have is pitch, where it's just looking at the signal and converting that straight to sound. Now, once you do that, go back, you want to go into ground balance, change these. Ground stabilizer, again, that's something the CPU is doing to help you out. Learn not to use that. Set that down to 1. If you have tracking turned on where it auto tracks, turn that off. You're wasting a lot of CPU power trying to sit there and continuously scan the ground. It's time, it's a timer timing, you know, to go, okay, it's been 2 minutes. That all takes CPU power. And that's it. This program, with everything turned off and only the extreme option that you need to operate, is going to give you the deepest, most amount of time to process a signal. So when you have a coin that's on edge, this long signal is going to be able to process that and tell you it's a coin down there and it's on edge. Whereas before, if it didn't have enough time, it would go, I can't figure this out in the amount of time that I've been given to process this. My CPU isn't fast enough, so I'm just not going to report anything. Anyway, I hope that helps with the Deus. And again, this can be applied to any metal detector that has features or options that you can set. And you can also do this to any of the other programs on the Deus, you know, mono, etc. Anyway, hope this helps. Hex yeah. Keep swinging.